ninth series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends was broadcast in 2005. It was narrated by Michael Angelis in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US. Like most of the other series, it ran for 26 episodes.
So what's Series 9 like compared to Series 8? Well, they brought back the narrow gauge engines and started introducing new characters, so that has to be a good thing, right? Right?
That's right, this series brought the return of the narrow gauge engines. Well, almost all the narrow gauge engines. A lot of them were missing from the series, including Sir Handel and Duke. And it's kind of hard to have missed them at this point because they had changed so much in terms of character and locations. And since Series 5 they've been using larger scale models for the characters because it was hard for them to work with the small models from the 4th series. And their stories are somewhat okay, but most of them are repetitive from previous stories, and I honestly haven't missed them that much in this series because they changed too much.
By this point the narrow gauge engines were definitely out of character, aside from Duncan.
The only character that I can safely say that does remain himself is Duncan, because he was always the impatient and bad-tempered narrow gauge engine of the series, and he still is in this series. Despite the fact that he's kinda stupid and has to learn his lessons countless times. But besides that, he's still the same old Duncan that he was before. The 9th series also brought in the controller for the narrow gauge railway named Mr. Percival, also known as the Fin Controller. A character who was in the Railway series but wasn't introduced in the TV series when the narrow gauge engines were introduced. So having Mr. Percival in is a nice change, instead of having the Fat Controller be the unquestionable God, Lord and Master of the Sodor Railway. It's just really nice to have a controller for the narrow gauge railway who isn't the Fat Controller. The series also brought in many different new characters, including Molly, Neville, Dennis and Mighty Mac. And out of all the new characters in this series, I can honestly say that Mighty Mac is the most interesting of these characters, since it's a double-headed locomotive from the narrow gauge railway. And this is the type of engine that I rode on in Wales many years ago when I was a kid, and it's really interesting and new to see this kind of engine in the TV series. And they're really your basic twins who get into arguments about which way they're going to go, and they always get into trouble for it since they're both the same engine and they can't decide which way they should go. And what's also interesting about him is Mighty has hair on him, and not many engines actually have hair on them. So Mighty was the first, while Mac doesn't have any hair at all. Molly is another interesting character in the 9th series because of her personality that she showed in her only episode where she gets a big screen appearance. She has a peacekeeper attitude, tends to be rather sensible, and is looked upon as the big sister of some of the engines. However, because of her sensitivity, she can be easily embarrassed or upset by conflict. And that's a really nice character trope for Molly. It's just a shame that she didn't get as much screen time as she should have. Neville was another character that was quite interesting, but didn't really get much personality development in his one episode, despite the fact that some of the engines confuse him for a diesel engine just because of the way he looks.
I hear you're a racist now. How did you get interested in that type of thing? Should we all be racist now?
And that is quite interesting, but they didn't really give him enough screen time to fully develop his personality. Dennis is also another character that was introduced to this series, and he was pretty much just a lazy little bastard who wanted others to do his jobs for him because he was too lazy to do it himself. Which did make for one of the funnier episodes of the series, but like Neville, he didn't really get much time to develop a personality besides the fact that he's lazy and trying to learn to not be lazy. There was a huge opportunity to have episodes with him where he's learning not to be so lazy, but because entertainment had this tendency to introduce some new characters and then not focus on them again afterwards, we get one of these characters like Dennis who was given a quite interesting backstory and character development, but didn't have enough episodes to develop him as a character.
The episodes they had for the new characters were interesting, but it's just a shame that they never gave them more time to develop in further episodes, because these characters had the potential to be good characters aside from just toys on the shelf.
And upon doing research for this series, I found out quite surprisingly that Sharon Miller, the head writer of series 13 to 16, started off writing for Thomas in this series.
May God have mercy on us all.
And as you could well imagine, all the stories that she wrote for are very repetitive and contradict previous episodes, with the whole 3 strikes you're out bullshit. But like series 8, there are some episodes that are pretty decent. Like Molly's Special is one of my favourite episodes because it looks at Molly, one of my favourite new series characters who should have been given more time to develop a personality. but this one does define her as a character, and it's really a shame that she doesn't get seen in the show more often. Mighty Mac was pretty hilarious because of the character Mighty Mac and how they have a problem deciding which way to go. Respect for Gordon shows Gordon as the big pompous buffoon that he is in the show, and it's a nice change to see Gordon get into trouble but not be told off by the Fat Controller. The lack of the scolding in this episode is quite a nice change from the previous episodes. Emily Knows Best isn't one of the best episodes of this series, but I do have to admit she does get a little chuckle out of me in this episode every now and then. Thomas's Day Off, an episode that was actually written by Sharon Miller, is one of the episodes from her that doesn't suck. And it gives a good personality for Dennis, and it's just a shame that he didn't get as much time to develop a personality. Duncan and the Old Mine is an entertaining episode because it's another one that focuses on Duncan, and the Duncan episodes rarely disappoint me. And admittedly, I do find Flower Power kind of funny, because it's really nice to show Thomas doing a ghostly trick on Diesel after his piss taken. Even though Diesel really should have been sent packing countless times, even though they led him back onto the railway, I don't know how many times. But it's the Fat Controller's railway, and let's be honest, he's sort of lost it over the years, I reckon. But it does make for an entertaining Halloween episode, nonetheless.
So Series 9 is an improvement over Series 8, but it's still pretty bad, especially when you compare it to the classic episodes. So an improvement over Series 8, but pretty bad.
So even though Series 9 isn't exactly top-notch like the classic series, it is a definite improvement over Series 8. With more better stories, some character development from the new characters, and the return of the narrow gauge engines. So if you can find some good episodes in this series, then I'd definitely check them out and skip the bad ones. But like Series 8, if it's not to your taste, then skip it and just go to the classic episodes and the Andrew Brennan era.